The massive ship drifted silently through the void of space, its sleek hull reflecting the distant starlight. Captain James stood at the bridge of the exploration vessel, New Dawn, his eyes fixed on the main view screen. What they had just discovered would change everything, though not in the way anyone expected. "Captain, initial scans are complete," reported Officer Mike from his station. "You're not going to believe this, but we're picking up readings of thousands of ships ahead. It looks like an entire fleet." James leaned forward in his command chair, his interest piqued. After 20 years of deep space exploration, he had seen many strange things, but this was different. "Show me," he ordered. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that made everyone on the bridge gasp. Stretching out before them was an armada of ships, floating motionless in the dark expanse of space. The vessels were massive, their hulls marked with age and scarred by what appeared to be ancient battles. "Get me a close-up on one of those ships," James commanded. As the image zoomed in, he could see the weathered surface of the nearest vessel. It was covered in what looked like rust, its hull bearing marks that spoke of countless years exposed to the harsh environment of space. "Sir," called out Officer Mary from the science station, "dating analysis suggests these ships are at least 50,000 years old. Maybe older." She paused, double-checking her readings. "The technology appears primitive by our standards. They seem to use basic nuclear propulsion and projectile weapons." The bridge crew exchanged looks of amusement. In an age of quantum drives and plasma cannons, such ancient technology seemed almost laughable. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Within hours, the Galactic Council had assembled an emergency meeting to discuss the finding. The Grand Chamber was filled with representatives from 100 different species, all eager to learn about this mysterious fleet. Council leader Robert, a tall man with gray hair and sharp features, stood at the central podium. "What are we looking at, exactly?" he asked, his voice echoing through the chamber. Captain James stepped forward to present his findings. Behind him, a holographic display showed detailed scans of the derelict fleet. "We've counted approximately 10,000 vessels of various sizes. They appear to be military in nature, though their design is unlike anything we've seen before." "Primitive technology," scoffed one of the alien council members, his scaled skin shifting colors in amusement. "Look at those basic metal alloys. They wouldn't last 5 minutes against a modern combat vessel." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Even James had to admit there was some truth to it. The ships looked like relics from a forgotten age, their technology hopelessly outdated compared to modern standards. Nevertheless, James continued, maintaining his professional demeanor, "I recommend we establish a research station to study the fleet. There might be historical value, if nothing else." The council agreed, though mainly out of bureaucratic obligation rather than genuine interest. They assigned a small research team and gave them a modest budget, treating the whole thing as little more than an archaeological curiosity. As James watched the initial research vessels approach the ancient fleet, something kept nagging at the back of his mind. There was something about these ships, something in their design that seemed purposeful. Why would anyone build such a massive fleet and then abandon it? And why out here, at the very edge of known space? The captain stood in his quarters later that night, staring out at the distant fleet through his viewport. The aged vessels hung there like silent guardians, their secrets still locked away inside their weathered hulls. Despite what everyone else thought, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. He had no way of knowing then that in just a few months, every person who had laughed at these primitive ships would come to regret their arrogance. For within those ancient vessels lay the key to humanity's greatest achievement and the galaxy's salvation. But for now, the fleet remained silent, waiting patiently as it had for millennia, ready to reveal its true purpose when the time was right. 3 months after the discovery of the ancient fleet, the first signs of trouble appeared. It started with a simple distress signal from a small mining colony on the outer rim. By the time help arrived, the entire colony was gone. not destroyed, but simply empty, as if everyone had vanished into thin air. Commander Lisa sat in her office at the Galactic Council headquarters, reviewing the reports from 5 similar incidents. Her dark hair was messy from running her hands through it in frustration, and empty coffee cups littered her desk. "Another colony gone," she muttered, pulling up the latest report. No signs of battle, no bodies, just empty buildings and abandoned machinery. A soft chime announced the arrival of Captain James. He looked tired, his uniform wrinkled from too many hours on duty. "You need to see this," he said, placing a datapad on her desk. The screen showed a grainy video from a security camera at the latest colony. At first, there was nothing unusual, just workers going about their daily tasks. Then something moved in the shadows. The image quality was poor, but Lisa could make out what looked like a dark, shifting mass moving through the colony. Within minutes, all the people were gone. "What are we dealing with?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The science team is calling them the Swarm," James replied. "They seem to be some kind of collective organism. Our weapons," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "they don't work. The Swarm just adapts." Lisa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gleaming spires of the council city. "How many colonies have we lost?" 12 as of this morning. The council is trying to keep it quiet to prevent panic, but James didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew it was only a matter of time before the news got out. The emergency council session that followed was anything but quiet. Representatives from 100 worlds argued and shouted, each demanding protection for their territories. "Our most advanced warships are useless," shouted one representative. "The Swarm just absorbs our energy weapons and grows stronger." "Physical weapons are no better," added another. "They can change their molecular structure to resist any material we throw at them." Lisa sat quietly, something tugging at her memory. The way the Swarm moved, the way it adapted. She had seen this before. Not in person, but in some old historical record she had studied. She pulled out her datapad and began searching through ancient human military archives. Most of these records were fragments, preserved from before humanity joined the Galactic Council. Hours passed as she dug deeper and deeper into the past. Then she found it. "Captain James," she called over the comm. "Meet me at the ancient fleet." Now, when James arrived at the research station orbiting the derelict fleet, he found Lisa surrounded by holographic displays showing old military records. "Look at this," she said, pointing to one particular image. It showed a dark, shifting mass almost identical to what they had seen in the colony footage. "This is from Earth's archives, dated over 50,000 years ago." James's eyes widened. "The same enemy?" "I think so," Lisa nodded. "And look at these ships." She pulled up a technical schematic of one of the ancient fleet's vessels. These weren't just warships. They were built specifically to fight the Swarm. The primitive weapons, the hull design, even the power systems, it's all purposeful. Before James could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. A young officer burst into the room, his face pale. Multiple Swarm signatures detected. "They're attacking the core worlds." Lisa and James shared a knowing look. The ancient fleet no longer seemed like a useless relic. Instead, it stood as humanity's forgotten answer to an enemy they had faced and defeated once before. As emergency signals flooded in from across the galaxy, the weathered hulls of the ancient ships waited silently in the void, holding secrets that might be the key to survival. The only question was, could they unlock those secrets in time? Dr. Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead as he worked his way through another of the ancient ship's corridors. The emergency lights from his team's equipment cast long shadows on the dusty walls. After Commander Lisa's discovery about the Swarm, every available researcher had been diverted to studying the fleet. Dr. Tom called out his assistant, Bill, from somewhere ahead. "You need to see this." Tom hurried forward, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He found Bill standing in front of what appeared to be the ship's bridge. The room was massive, filled with control stations covered in a thick layer of dust. "Look at these markings," Bill said, pointing his light at the main console. Tom leaned in closer, his heart skipping a beat. The writing was faded but clearly visible. "It's English," he whispered. "Ancient English." His hands trembled as he brushed away decades of dust, revealing more text. "These ships, they're human-made." The discovery sent shockwaves through the research team. Within hours, they had found more evidence: logbooks, technical manuals, even personal journals, all written in various old Earth languages. In his temporary office aboard the research station, Tom pored over the translated documents. The story they told was incredible. Humanity had achieved space travel far earlier than anyone had thought possible, driven by a desperate need to survive. His comm unit buzzed. "Dr. Tom." Commander Lisa's voice came through. "What have you found?" "Commander, you're not going to believe this," Tom replied, his voice filled with excitement. "According to these logs, humanity encountered the swarm over 50,000 years ago. They were our first contact with alien life, and it nearly led to our extinction." He pulled up more translated text. "But our ancestors found a way to fight back. They discovered that the swarm had specific weaknesses, things we would consider primitive today. The swarm evolved to counter energy weapons and advanced technology, but they remained vulnerable to certain types of kinetic weapons and electromagnetic pulses. That's why the fleet's technology looks so basic," Lisa realized. "It wasn't primitive at all. It was perfectly engineered to exploit the swarm's weaknesses." Tom nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Exactly. The fleet's weapons aren't outdated. They're specialized. The railguns, the nuclear-powered electromagnetic pulse generators, even the thick metal hulls. It's all designed specifically to combat the swarm." He paused, reading further in the logs. "But there's more. I found entries from the fleet's admiral, a man named Ben. He wrote about why they hid the fleet out here." Tom pulled up the relevant passage and read aloud. "We won the war, but at a terrible cost. The knowledge we gained about space travel, about building these ships, about the swarm, it's too dangerous. Other species will emerge, advance, reach for the stars. If they find our technology too soon, they might attract the swarm's attention before they're ready. We choose to fade into history, to let humanity start again, to let the galaxy develop naturally. But we leave this fleet as a guardian, waiting for the day it might be needed again." The implications stunned them both into silence. Humanity had deliberately hidden its greatest achievement, sacrificed its own history, to protect the galaxy's future. "Commander," Tom said finally, "there's one more thing. These ships, they're not dead. They're in hibernation. The logs contain instructions for reactivating them, but it's complicated. The startup sequence requires specific genetic markers, human genetic markers. That's why no one else could activate them." Lisa realized. They were waiting for us. Before Tom could respond, the station's alarms began blaring again. The swarm had taken another system, moving steadily closer to the core worlds. The ancient fleet's automated sensors detected the threat, and deep within the ships, long dormant systems began to stir. As Tom watched through the station's viewport, tiny lights began to flicker across the ancient vessels, like stars waking up after a long night. The fleet that everyone had laughed at was about to show its true power, if they could figure out how to fully awaken it in time. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the research station as Commander Lisa rushed through the corridors. The latest reports were grim. The swarm had taken 3 more systems in the past day alone. She burst into the main laboratory where Dr. Tom and his team were working frantically to decode more of the ancient fleet's secrets. Holographic displays filled the room, showing ship schematics and translated log entries. "Talk to me, Doctor," she said, slightly out of breath. "Tell me you found something we can use." Tom looked up from his work, his eyes bright with excitement despite his obvious exhaustion. "We've cracked it, Commander. The connection between these ships and the swarm, it's incredible. He pulled up a series of technical diagrams. Look at these weapon systems. The railguns don't just fire normal projectiles. They're designed to fragment into thousands of smaller pieces, each carrying a specific frequency of electromagnetic energy. "Why is that important?" asked James, who had just entered the lab. "Because the swarm isn't just one organism," Tom explained. "It's billions of tiny machines working together. The ancient humans discovered that these machines use quantum entanglement to coordinate their actions. That's why they can adapt so quickly to our modern weapons. They share information instantly." Lisa leaned in closer to the displays. "But how does that help us?" "The fragmentation weapons disrupt their quantum field," Tom said, pointing to more diagrams. "The electromagnetic pulse from each fragment creates a cascade effect, breaking their connection to each other. Without that connection, they're just individual machines, dangerous but not unstoppable. That's why our energy weapons don't work," James realized. "The swarm just absorbs the energy and uses it to strengthen their quantum field." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Our ancestors figured this out the hard way. They had to step backward technologically to move forward strategically. Every piece of technology on these ships was built with one purpose: to break the swarm's connection to itself." He pulled up another display, this one showing the fleet's power distribution system. Even the nuclear reactors serve a dual purpose. They don't just power the ships, they create a specific type of radiation that interferes with the swarm's ability to reform after being broken apart. Suddenly, the station shook violently. Warning sirens blared as a voice came over the intercom. Multiple swarm signatures detected in nearby space. All personnel to emergency stations. Through the laboratory's viewport, they could see dark shapes moving against the stars. The swarm had found them, but something else was happening too. The ancient fleet, which had been slowly waking up, began to pulse with a soft blue light. "The ships," Tom whispered. "They're recognizing the threat. The defensive systems are activating automatically." They watched in awe as the nearest ancient vessel's hull began to shift. Panels that had appeared to be simple armor plates split apart, revealing rows of railgun batteries. Other sections opened to expose what looked like massive antenna arrays, the electromagnetic pulse generators. "We need to get those ships fully operational now," Lisa commanded. "How close are you to cracking the startup sequence?" "We have most of it decoded," Tom replied, moving to another console. "The ships need a direct neural interface with a human operator. The genetic markers are just the first step. The ships literally need to sync with human brainwave patterns." "Why?" James asked. "Because humans were the only ones who could defeat the swarm before," Lisa realized. "The ships were built to work with human intuition, human decision-making patterns." Another explosion rocked the station. Through the viewport, they could see the swarm beginning to surround the ancient fleet. The ship's defensive systems were holding them back, but without active control, they couldn't mount a real counterattack. "How long to set up a neural interface?" Lisa asked, her voice urgent. Tom looked at his data, then at the approaching swarm. 20 minutes, maybe less. "But Commander," he hesitated, "whoever connects to the fleet will be taking the huge risk. We don't know what that kind of direct neural connection might do to a person." Lisa straightened her uniform and stepped forward. "We don't have a choice. Get it ready." "I'll do it." The research station's medical bay had been quickly converted into an improvised neural interface chamber. Commander Lisa lay on the central bed, surrounded by hastily assembled equipment. Dr. Tom worked frantically to connect the final components, while Captain James coordinated the station's defenses. "The swarm is getting closer," James reported, watching the tactical display. "Our modern ships are barely slowing them down." Tom attached the last sensor to Lisa's forehead. "Commander, are you absolutely sure about this? The neural load from connecting to an entire fleet, it could be too much for your mind to handle." Lisa managed a small smile. "We're out of options, Doctor. Every minute we wait, another colony falls to the swarm. Just do it. Tom nodded and began the activation sequence. Ancient computers hummed to life, their systems reaching out to connect with Lisa's neural patterns. She gasped as the first connection formed. It felt like ice water flowing through her mind. Neural link at 15%, Tom announced, watching the readings carefully. Your vital signs are holding steady. Through the medical bay's viewport, they could see the ancient fleet beginning to respond. More systems were coming online, lights flickering across the massive hull plates. The swarm pressed closer, but seemed hesitant to directly attack the old ships. 30% connection, Tom called out. Lisa's hands gripped the bed's edges, her knuckles white. In her mind, she could begin to sense the fleet. Thousands of ships, each with its own systems and weapons, all waiting to be controlled. Multiple swarm breaches on decks 3 through 7. James shouted over the comm. Station defenses are failing. 50% connection, Tom reported, his voice tense. Commander, your heart rate is climbing. We can still abort. No. Lisa cut him off through gritted teeth. Keep going. I can feel them. The ships. They're waiting for me. The station shook violently as the swarm began its attack in earnest. Modern defense systems, worth trillions in credits, proved useless against the adaptive enemy. Through it all, Tom kept his focus on the neural interface readings. 75% connection. Commander, try to stay calm. Your mind is sensing with the fleet's command and control systems. In Lisa's mind, the connection bloomed like a flower made of light. She could see through the sensors of every ship, feel the thrum of their ancient reactors, sense the ready state of their weapons. More than that, she could access the tactical databases, centuries of combat data against the swarm, waiting to be used. 90% connection. Almost there. The medical bay door burst open. James rushed in, his uniform scorched. We're out of time. The swarm is inside the station. We need tow. 100% connection achieved, Tom shouted. Lisa's eyes snapped open, glowing with the same soft blue light as the fleet. When she spoke, her voice carried an echo of ancient power. All ships, battle stations. The response was immediate and awesome to behold. Thousands of ancient vessels moved in perfect coordination, their formations taking shape with fluid grace. Weapon systems that had been dormant for millennia roared to life. Through Lisa's neural link, the fleet executed maneuvers that would have been impossible for individual pilots to coordinate. The ships moved like the fingers of a single hand, each one exactly where it needed to be. The swarm attacked, but this time found itself facing an enemy that remembered all its weaknesses. Railguns fired their specialized ammunition, breaking up the swarm's quantum connections. Electromagnetic pulse generators created zones of disruption, preventing the enemy from reforming. It's working, James exclaimed, watching the battle through the viewport. They're actually pushing the swarm back. Lisa didn't respond, couldn't respond. Her mind was fully immersed in controlling the fleet, executing battle plans that had been perfected 50,000 years ago. Through the ship's sensors, she could see the swarm's collective intelligence beginning to fragment under the precise assault. But even as the ancient fleet proved its worth, alarm indicators began flashing on Tom's medical monitors. Commander's neural activity is off the charts, he reported worriedly. The interface is putting too much strain on her mind. We need to disconnect. No, Lisa managed to say, her voice strained but determined. The fleet remembers how to beat them. We can't stop now. Whatever happens to me, just let me finish this. The battle raged on, with humanity's forgotten guardians finally awakened to serve their purpose once again. Space itself seemed to tremble as the battle reached its peak. Through her neural connection to the fleet, Commander Lisa could sense everything. Every shot fired, every movement of the swarm, every response from the ancient ships that now felt like extensions of her own body. Commander's vital signs are critical, Dr. Tom reported, his voice tight with concern. Brain activity is way beyond safe levels. But Lisa barely heard him. In her mind, she was everywhere at once, directing the fleet in an elaborate dance of destruction. The ships moved with impossible precision, their formations creating overlapping fields of electromagnetic disruption that tore the swarm apart. "Look," Captain James pointed at the tactical display. "The swarm is changing its strategy." The dark mass of enemies had indeed begun to shift, attempting to adapt as they always had. But this time, something was different. As they tried to evolve new defenses, the ancient fleet's weapons simply adjusted their attack patterns, drawing from 50,000 years of combat data stored in their memory banks. The fleet, Lisa managed to speak, her voice distant. "It's not just weapons and ships. It's a legacy. Every battle they ever fought, every adaptation they ever saw, it's all here." Through the station's viewports, they watched as the ancient vessels demonstrated why they had been feared so long ago. Railguns fired in synchronized patterns, their specialized projectiles creating a web of destruction that the swarm couldn't escape. Electromagnetic pulse generators pulsed in carefully timed sequences, preventing the enemy from reforming into larger masses. "Multiple swarm clusters are breaking apart," James announced, excitement creeping into his voice. "They're losing their collective intelligence." In the medical bay, Lisa's body arched in pain as she pushed the neural connection to its limits. Through the fleet's sensors, she could feel the swarm's confusion, its inability to comprehend what was happening. For the first time in modern history, the enemy faced weapons it couldn't adapt to, tactics it couldn't counter. "Energy readings from the fleet are off the charts," Tom reported, checking his instruments. "The ships are channeling more power than should be possible for their reactors." Lisa knew what was happening. The fleet wasn't just fighting, it was remembering. Each ship carried the memory of humanity's greatest victory, and now those memories were awakening fully. Weapons that had been dismissed as primitive revealed their true sophistication. "All ships," Lisa commanded, her voice overlaid with echoes of ancient power, "execute Pattern 7. The fleet responded instantly. Thousands of ships moved in perfect synchronization, forming a massive sphere around the largest concentration of the swarm. Energy began to build between the vessels, creating a contained field of pure electromagnetic chaos. "My God," James whispered, watching the display. "They're not just destroying the swarm, they're containing it." The sphere of ancient ships began to contract, their combined electromagnetic field crushing the swarm into an ever smaller space. The enemy tried to escape, to adapt, to evolve. But the ancient weapons gave them no chance, no time to recover. In the medical bay, alarms were blaring as Lisa's vital signs became more erratic. "Commander," Tom pleaded, "you need to disconnect. The neural load is too much." "Almost done," Lisa managed through clenched teeth. In her mind, she could see the final sequence, the killing blow that would end this threat once and for all. With a thought, she commanded the fleet to execute its final attack. Every ship fired simultaneously, their weapons converging on the trapped swarm. The resulting explosion was like a new star being born, but contained within the fleet's electromagnetic sphere. When the light faded, nothing remained of the swarm within the containment field. The ancient ships held their position, their weapons still ready, their systems humming with power that had waited millennia to be used again. "Swarm signatures, dropping to 0, James reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're actually retreating. The remaining clusters are running away." Lisa smiled faintly, blood trickling from her nose. "Of course they are," she whispered. "They remember these ships. They remember their defeat." Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. 3 weeks after the battle, Commander Lisa opened her eyes in the Galactic Council's premier medical facility. The room was filled with soft light and the quiet hum of monitoring equipment. Captain James sat beside her bed, while Dr. Tom reviewed medical readings on a nearby screen. "Welcome back, Commander," James said softly. "You've been unconscious for quite a while." Lisa tried to speak, found her throat dry. After taking a sip of water, she asked, "The fleet, the swarm." "The swarm is gone," Tom answered, moving to her bedside. "Well, most of it. The few clusters that escaped have fled beyond the galaxy's edge. Your victory was complete." "Not my victory," Lisa corrected, her voice growing stronger. "Theirs. Our ancestors. I just helped them finish what they started." The door slid open, and Council Leader Robert entered, looking more humble than anyone had ever seen him. "Commander Lisa," he said, "the Council would like to speak with you, if you feel strong enough." Minutes later, Lisa found herself in a wheelchair in the Grand Council chamber. But this time, there was no laughter, no mockery. The representatives of 100 worlds sat in respectful silence as she began to speak. "What we discovered wasn't just a fleet," she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "It was a message, a gift, and a warning, all in one. Our ancestors achieved space travel far earlier than our records showed. They fought the swarm, learned its weaknesses, and built a fleet specifically designed to combat it." She paused, looking around the chamber, but they knew that if they revealed this technology too soon, it might attract the swarm's attention before other species were ready. So they made an incredible sacrifice. They hid their achievement, erased their own history, and left the fleet as a sleeping guardian. Tom stepped forward, holding up one of the ancient data cores they'd recovered. The ships contained detailed records of everything humanity learned about the swarm. The weapons weren't primitive. They were perfect. Developed through centuries of combat, refined until they couldn't be improved upon. "But why hide it all?" one of the council members asked. "Why not leave some warning?" "Because they knew that knowledge would change the course of galactic development," James answered. "If young civilizations knew about the swarm too soon, they might develop weapons they weren't ready to control. Our ancestors chose to let each species grow naturally while standing guard in secret." Lisa nodded. The fleet was programmed to wake up only when the swarm returned and someone with human DNA was present. They knew that by then, humanity would have rejoined galactic society naturally, ready to help face the threat. The council chamber was silent as the implications sank in. Humanity's first achievement hadn't been joining the galactic community. It had been saving it, long before anyone knew they needed saving. "The fleet remains active," Lisa continued, "but its purpose has changed. The ships now stand as a reminder that age doesn't equal wisdom, and that knowledge takes many forms. They're our connection to our own forgotten history, and a symbol of sacrifice for the greater good." She smiled slightly. "The same fleet you laughed at 3 months ago now guards your worlds. The weapons you called primitive save your people. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson in all of this. Never judge by appearances, and never assume that older means weaker." As if to emphasize her point, a holographic display activated, showing the ancient fleet in orbit around the council world. The ships gleamed in the sunlight, their once rusty hulls now restored to their original glory. They moved with purpose and grace, their very presence a reminder of humanity's long vigil. "So what happens now?" someone asked. "Now," Lisa replied, "we learn. The fleet carries millennia of knowledge, not just about warfare, but about cooperation, sacrifice, and foresight. Our ancestors left us more than weapons. They left us wisdom. And this time, we won't forget it." The council chamber erupted in applause, but Lisa barely heard it. Her mind was with the fleet, with the ancient ships that had waited so patiently to fulfill their purpose. They had been built by humans who gave up their place in history to protect the future, and in doing so, they had become something more than weapons. They had become humanity's greatest legacy.